Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we'll be talking about the Rise of Skywalker box office because we now have the third weekend numbers, and the numbers are not even as good as they were expecting. Once again, I feel like we're saying this every single time that the numbers are not reaching the expectations that were set. Even the projections that were being given of a 49% drop were not matched, but rather exceeded to the point where it was a 53% drop from its second weekend to its third weekend, meaning that this film does not have the usual Christmas legs that many other films previously have had, and that this film is now on pace to potentially be the second lowest grossing Star Wars film under the Disney regime, coming in above Solo: A Star Wars Story, but coming in possibly below a film like Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. That is right, a non-canon, or rather a non-episodic film could potentially, when adjusted for inflation of course, be a higher grossing film than the last film in the Skywalker saga. That's right, 9 films, all supposed to have been leading up to this point after a $4 billion purchase by Disney, supposed to be the biggest IP of all time, is gonna come in at a whimper, and according to some media analysts, might just top out at $1.1 billion if it is lucky. Let's go ahead and dive into these numbers real quick. I did a full box office breakdown over on the Geeks and Gamers channel, so make sure you go check that out. It'll either be live right now or a little bit later today, but I do a full breakdown of that. I go into more details on the numbers, but I like to be able to do kind of like an extra video on my channel about it because this is pretty big news, and I love covering the box office, and so this is fun for me. So it has now made $918 million, which for most other movies in most other franchises would be very good. The reason why this is not a good number for Rise of Skywalker is because of the fact that it is that 9th film. It is the end of the saga. This should be like the end game of the Star Wars universe, and it is simply not performing in that way. Yes, it had a strong opening weekend that came in well behind other films previous to it. Yes, it did have a strong Christmas day, the strongest Christmas day out of the previous films, and yet it still is not performing nearly as well as it should be because of especially low numbers in the foreign marketplace and numbers that just aren't matching up with previous releases in the domestic marketplace. This movie is just, and I say this in all honesty, failing on so many levels. Now, when people hear the word failure, they honestly, they usually think, oh, you're saying that it's flopping, but it's not flopping. You're right. It's not a flop. This film is actually, according to my numbers, now a profitable movie. It is now a $26 million in the black film. It is no longer in that negative territory. However, even though that might be the case, that now it is in the black, we have to take these things into perspective. And the perspective that we have to take into account is the fact that Disney purchased Star Wars for $4 billion. They had one giant, crazy success in The Force Awakens, and ever since that high point, it has just been tumble, 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 tumble. And yes, one could say that it reached its ground level floor with Solo: A Star Wars Story that didn't even crack $400 million in the worldwide box office and ended up losing around $200 million or so at the box office. But even that take into account cannot take away how terrible it is for a film like this, the 9th film, the Skywalker saga, the end of what presumably could be, especially after these numbers, the end of Star Wars in the main cinematic releases and not just being left to Disney Plus shows. It's sad. It really is sad. The fact that this movie is going to come in closer to the minimum projection range on my estimates and not to the average or max projection should scream terrible to any person that has a brain that wants to actually use logic. I'm not trying to say you're stupid if you don't think this movie is going to do as poorly as I'm saying that it's going to, but let us at least be honest with the numbers, and the best way we can do that is by comparing it to the previous movies. So I do a fuller breakdown over on Geeks and Gamers, but let's just go to these numbers here, specifically the inflated for the adjusted for inflation numbers. And so right now, The Rise of Skywalker in 2019 is at $450 million domestically. The problem with that is when you adjust Rogue One's numbers for inflation, that film ended its run with $556 million. Based on the current rates of this movie, it seems that it will probably end its run, Rise of Skywalker that is, either at these numbers or slightly above or slightly below. No matter how you spin that, for the last film, the Skywalker saga, to be coming in close to Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, which was a $1 billion success, But when you compare that to the the over $2 billion success of the Force Awakens, you realize actually it's not nearly as much as it probably should be, especially when this film cost $75 million less to make and came out at less theaters, etc. I'm honestly just amazed. Also had a much smaller opening than Rise of Skywalker. The reason why Rogue One did as well, by the way, is because it had fantastic legs. That's right. It had very great calves, one could argue, of a film, and it just was able to continue to produce and produce over time. And that it becomes very apparent when you look to these numbers. So at this time right now, you have $450 million for The Rise of Skywalker. At this same time in history, Rogue One was at $424 million. That is before you adjust for inflation, meaning that Rogue One was making just about as much money by the time, or at the same time in history, as currently The Rise of Skywalker is in the domestic marketplace. Now, does that mean that the film is outperforming in the foreign marketplace? Well, again, compared to Rogue One, probably, because this is definitely a film that more people, normie audiences across the world, are likely to see, because whether we want to admit it or not, Star Wars is definitely a mostly American franchise, where most of the marketplace is going to be supporting it are going to be American audiences, but that's obviously not the complete truth, because we know countries like the UK, Australia, France, Germany, they also go out to support these films as well and give the film a lot of money. But let's go ahead and adjust this for inflation. So we have this, and then let's have adjusted for inflation. And let's see if we can do this. I love doing this stuff live because I just think it's a lot more entertaining in that way. So let's see, U.S. inflation calculator. We want to see what the number was back in 2016 was when Rogue One came out. 2016. Let's see what those numbers would be today. So 2016. And will this allow me to enter in the full number? It might not. Calculate. It doesn't seem to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and go to a different inflation calculator. That's why I love doing this stuff live, man, because it keeps things entertaining. It keeps everything going. It keeps the conversation going. And this is a site that I actually like a lot more anyway. So let's paste that in there. And we're going to do the start year of 2016, and calculate that. So this number in today's dollars, it would actually be $455 million. So yes, I can now confirm, based on this site, assuming this site's rate is correct, that Rogue One had more money at this time in history than currently Rise of Skywalker has. Rogue One, which ended its run at $1 billion, which when you adjust for inflation is probably closer to 1.1, 1.2. But you have now the ninth film, and I'm going to keep on saying it because the point needs to be made. The ninth film in the Skywalker saga, the end of an era, what's supposed to be the biggest movie of the year, coming in at a whimper and possibly not going to be able to end its run ahead of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. We're not even talking about Last Jedi anymore. This film's not even going to reach or come close to Last Jedi levels. But the fact that we're now talking about this being a possibility is insane. If you're just saying, oh, Odin, you're trying to spin things, etc., let's go to Scott Mendelson. Let's go to someone that is definitely not Phantom Menace, that's definitely not a part of this community, and let's see what he has to say. He has this at the end of his article today. Presuming the film ends up with $545 million and $555 million overseas, this will be a 12% drop domestic, 22% drop overseas from The Last Jedi, which would be a decent hold in most situations. So he's basically saying, let's talk about the likely scenario. Guess what that number adds up to? $1.1 billion. Guess what happens when you adjust this for inflation and add in domestic market? This brings it up to $1.080 billion. But that does not include the foreign international box office numbers adjusted for inflation, because it's almost impossible to go country by country because of all the different rates of inflation that exist. But if you did that, I think most of us could be fair to assume that this film would probably be at the $1.1 billion range. And so therefore, when you take that into account, you're looking at The Rise of Skywalker, the end of an era, the end of a saga that might come in underneath Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, and be one of the most pitiful endings to any saga that's ever existed in history. We're not just talking about a film flopping, because this film's not flopping. This film has made profit at this point in time. But we are talking about one of the biggest epic fails of a studio in Disney of all time, to the point where if people are not fired for this, I don't know what else needs to happen in order for that to be brought about. This is a catastrophic failure. This should be the biggest film of the year. The fact that you have Frozen 2, which has just crossed $1.3 billion in the international market, is going to be a higher grossing film than that. You have several other films that came out, including a remake, a freaking live action remake reboot of the freaking Lion King coming in at $1.5 billion. You have the remake of Aladdin coming in pretty close to what this film is expected to make. I'm sorry, but there's no way you can spin that to say, yeah, these are the numbers that they're expecting. Yeah, it's performing like a blockbuster, but it's not performing like a Star Wars blockbuster, end of the era Star Wars blockbuster during Christmas time blockbuster. This is catastrophic in all the different ways that I possibly can say. And you may not believe that. You might say, oh, well, as long as it's making money, it's fine. But optics are everything. And when you have people like Scott Mendelson even pointing this fact out, that the film is likely going to end around this number, when you have other people now starting to turn on this film, saying, even Scott Mendelson shilling for this movie, saying, well, the Rise of Skywalker should really blame, people in the media, not Scott Mendelson, but people in the media blaming the fans now for the Rise of Skywalker's failure, or blaming the fact that Force Awakens was so successful and saying, well, the success of the Force Awakens, that's the reason why it's something that we shouldn't expect from this movie. That's the reason why there's so much negativity, because no one ever expected this film to make as much as the Force Awakens. Yeah, maybe ever since Disney dropped the ball with films like Solo and Last Jedi and, arguably even Force Awakens itself, Rogue One. Yeah, you're right. And you know what the problem is there? It's Disney. It's Disney running this into the ground. It's Disney saying, hey, let's take the prettiest girl at the ball and throw her into the dirt and then leave her there. Let's abandon her behind. And hey, she'll still be kind of pretty though, even though no one's going to see the prettiness and she's covered with dirt. So if anyone even catches a glance at her, right? That's basically what's going on here. Or as Tina, my Valkyrie, likes to say, it's like they took a bunch of chitlins and they didn't clean it. It's like they gave us unclean chitlins, which if you know anything about chitlins, go ahead and Google it. You realize, ooh, yeah, that pretty much is a good comparison to what we're being given by Disney right now. But anyway, I wanted to cover this story because it's something that you probably won't get a whole lot of, this comparison between the previous films. You'll get a lot of spin about, oh, the film is doing quite well, and oh, Odin is over elaborating what the actual production budget was for this film. Because even if the production budget was closer to this number, you can't tell me the marketing was only 1.5 times higher than this. Like there's no way you can argue that point. You have to admit that either the marketing costs more than normal or the budget costs more than normal. One has to be true, because did you look at the marketing campaign? Did you look at the fact that this was marketed to hell as the end of the saga, the end of an era? And yet the end of the era, just like democracy, falls to the ground, ends in applause, but ultimately ends in a whimper and dies. So anyway, let me know your thoughts about this. Do you think that it's going to beat Rogue One? Would you adjust for inflation, of course? And if anyone knows how to adjust for inflation for every single country to give us an actual raw total of what Rogue One actually made in 2019 dollars or now 2020 dollars, let me know that in the comment section below as well. If you like this video, please smash the like button. Give us a subscribe. It helps us out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Please check out the links below the video to support the channel. There's a Patreon subscribe star link. There's also, of course, merch if you want to buy a t-shirt. If you want my face on your shirt, those are available at a very reasonable price, I would say. Definitely the cheapest shirts in the Fandom Menace today, and I'm trying to work on some more designs for 2020. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.